At a recent press conference, my next guest called the Senate Republican transportation plan wholly inadequate. Joining me in the studio to further clarify his position on the plan is the ranking minority member of the Transportation Committee, Senator Scott Dibble. Welcome.
Thanks, Shannon.
Republicans argue that there's no reason to raise taxes to fund transportation at a time of surplus and that Minnesotans want tax cuts rather than tax increases. How do you respond?
Well, I'd just invite people to take a look at the Republican proposal. It is wholly inadequate. The resources that they use don't even get us to half of what's needed just to maintain our current system, whether we're talking about state roads or local roads. And they do absolutely nothing for transit, which in effect will force a 20% cut in our transit service in the metropolitan area, just in local bus service. So when we raise a little bit of money and put it into transportation, it has a return on the dollar, and we have a larger benefit to more prosperous lives and a better economy, more competitive state. So it's not like we're just putting money in, we're getting money out. If we fail to put investments, we pay in other ways. Decreased economic results, more expensive road fixes that'll have to occur in the future, people forced to buy a car who otherwise wouldn't necessarily need a car, and sprawl development that forces all kinds of new infrastructure that's very, very expensive as well.
What would it take for both urban and rural voters to feel that their needs are being met without being taxed too greatly? In a perfect world, how would transportation be funded?
Well, I think you just have a balance of sources and a balance of modes to make sure that we're building the kind of transportation that suits the needs to local conditions. We work closely with folks around the state and identify what those needs are, whether an interregional corridor needs to have a lane or two added to it, whether we need local bus service to serve senior citizens and students who are trying to get to school and work and other needs that they have throughout the day, or doing as other metropolitan areas do around the entire country, add a little bit to our sales tax so we have transit, which is a far more efficient form of transportation that doesn't then necessitate very expensive roads in the metro, saving everyone resources across the entire state.
The Senate Republican website I'm quoting, says, in the last biennium, taxpayers from all corners of the state subsidized 2 light rail lines in the Twin Cities metro to the tune of $49 million, regardless of their proximity to it or the ability to use it. So this argument that people in greater Minnesota don't want to pay for light rail is being used. Why should a taxpayer in Laverne contribute to metro area transit?
Well, let me first start with the premise that we're all one state and we're all invested in our success and making sure that we have prosperous communities in every part of the state. The metropolitan area generates about 2/3 of the gross domestic product, and the taxes that are generated in the metropolitan area actually go out to Laverne and places like that to pay for those roads. I will likely never drive on a stretch of county highway or state highway up in the far northwestern corner of the state. I'm happy to pay for the improvements to that community with my tax dollars because I know it's good for the folks who live up there and it's good for the overall state. Likewise, if we're paying for transit in the metropolitan area, as I mentioned earlier, that's a far more efficient form of transportation. We have about 800,000 folks who are going to come to the state over the next 10 or 15 years. There's no way we're going to be able to build enough roadway infrastructure, which is far more expensive and gets you far less transportation, to handle that kind of pressure. And if we were to do that, then all the roadway resources would be used in the metropolitan area. I think it's in everyone's interest for this state level of congestion that occurs in various places. We all participate together.
Well, speaking of the expense, Senator Newman pointed out that light rail costs $100 million per mile and described it as an inefficient way of spending money. Light rail is also fixed in one area, so there's inflexibility in terms of changing directions. Why do you think that light rail is an important part of overall transit?
Well, I'd say you go back and analyze the cost-benefit ratio. And to be sure, the capital expense for light rail is high. But the benefit is that you have a lot of development that occurs along that corridor that generates more than what you put in terms of taxes, in terms of jobs, in terms of economic growth in the metropolitan area that would not occur otherwise. Or if it were to occur, it would occur in very disparate ways that causes the need for very expensive infill infrastructure. It's far more expensive way for us to do our land use. Plus we attract all kinds of new businesses, new employees to the metropolitan area. And the very fact that it is fixed is a big reason for the higher benefit that you receive for the cost. Furthermore, the ongoing operations of a fixed guideway rail system is actually overall less expensive on an annual basis because you have fleets that last a whole lot longer. If you need to add capacity, you're not adding additional employee dollars, additional energy dollars. You can add capacity for a long, long time without adding additional vehicles and additional employees and that sort of thing.
Last year, the Office of the Legislative Auditor released a report on MnDOT's project selection process and found a lack of transparency. The Republican plan would require that the Commissioner of Transportation impartially score future projects and publish the results. Do you agree with this as a way to bring more transparency?
I think, more transparency, more consultation, and more objectivity. Kind of balancing those seem like they're competing ideas, but they're actually, if you put those in balance, then you have more trust for the project selection process, whether it's corridors of commerce or just the regular state road construction. But I find it a little bit ironic that Republicans are advocating this while they're also developing long lists of earmarked projects that may or may not be ready, that leapfrog other projects that aren't fully ready, not putting enough money in for these projects. Very, very untransparent. These lists were hatched in a corner office with no scrutiny or oversight. They seem to be political in nature. I would just ask for consistency from the majority party when they're talking about transparency and objectivity in the project selection process.
And one last question. There's a proposal in both the House and Senate plans that would impose a fee on electric cars. Electric car owners argue that because the cost of their cars is so much higher, they already pay high sales tax and registration fees. What's your view on that aspect of raising money?
Right, so the argument is that they don't pay gas taxes, so they don't pay for roads, but the truth is they pay more than they would otherwise pay for gas tax in the higher motor vehicle sales tax and the higher registration fees to offset the gas tax that they're not paying for in excess of 10 years. So it's really not an argument that really adds up.
So it doesn't work for you?
No, and furthermore, we have a lot of external benefits to electric cars in terms of the environment and in our energy profile and our carbon emissions.
Senator Dibble, I want to thank you for your time today.
Great, thank you, Shannon.